You know, if you're passionate about knives, like I am, you're in the right place. Let's read about knives. How's it going? Uh, Today we got a real interesting show. You know, there are a lot of great knife makers, historically great knife makers, the legends. You know, guys like Skagel and Loveless and Randall and Case that were great knife makers and great knife companies that have a long, long history. And they're very important for us to know about. You know, and that's not to discount the new guns that are coming in there, because we are in the golden age of knife making right now. Big renaissance of great knife makers, and we're going to visit with them and talk about them as we go along as well. But today I want to talk about one of the legends, because they're important for us to know about, and he is probably as legendary as any of the others, but I'll bet most of you don't know who I'm talking about. This guy's name is Rudolph H. Ruana, simply referred to as Rudy, famous enough to be living by his first name. Rudy opened his business, Ruana Knife Works, in 1938, the very same year that William Bo Randall, started Randall Made Knives. So both of these companies have a historic history and are a part of it. Randall is probably the better known of the two and makes some beautiful knives, but Ruana does as well. They kind of follow different paths and different courses as far as the type of products they made. Rudy Ruana started out was going back in his history to back when he was a farrier and blacksmith in the U.S. cavalry. And blacksmiths being blacksmiths and so forth, he was approached by an Indian guide that was with the troop and said, hey, I'd like you to make me a skinning knife, a knife that'll skin better than what I have. And so he did. Obviously, that's what Rudy did. And as people saw that knife, more and more of them would go to him and say, hey, can you make me one? Can you make me one? And he pretty much developed a great reputation as far as being a knife maker. He already started having a small following from that point. When his career with the cavalry ended, he bought a farm in North Dakota, okay, and that was in the 1920s. Unfortunately, at the time when he did that, that was the Dust Bowl and the Depression, and the two of those combined together, Rudy, like so many of the farmers and so many of the people in this country, suffered because of that and lost his farm. Pretty sad thing. He just picked the stuff up and moved on, and then ended up in Bonner, Montana. The reason he chose Bonner, as I understand it, was because there was a large Finnish society, or a Finnish enclave there of people from Finland. And Rudy's background goes back to Finland, and people tend to want to be with their own. And he went there, and he set up as a mechanic and a welder. Once again, welder, blacksmith, can you make me a knife? Or made a knife for himself. And as the demand for his knives grew, he opened up Ruana Knife Works. And they were a very well thought of and well made knife. Let's take a look at this knife right now. All right, this knife in front of me is a Ruana Model 28 CD, a Skinner Hunter. I have a great deal of background and knowledge about knives, but frankly, I'm not going to lie to anybody. I have to do research on stuff as well to find out. I know Ruana was from Bonner, Montana. I knew part of the story, but if I'm going to share it with you, it's going to be because I've researched and checked through things. When I was looking up the Model 28 CD, which is this knife again, one of the things I read in promotional material, in fact, this is in Ruana's catalog, is a mystery. You know, it opened up a mystery to me, and I just love mysteries. What it says in there is, favorite of famous hunting guide, and then it's gone. It's like we start this sentence, but it vanishes. Who's the famous hunting guide? It's interesting because then what happens is that after that gets printed and published, I think a lot of people who write about things, and the knife writers and the guys who make their internet and so forth, they just cut and paste little pieces out of things that they get to kind of create their story and to tell the story that they're trying to tell. and probably just cut and paste that and not recognize that the sentence isn't finished. And me being the 9-year-old inquisitive kid that I am, I need to find out. It bugs me. And after doing some research and cogitating on it, I think I have an answer, but I'm not going to tell you right now, because that's one of the things you're supposed to do on YouTube, is you're supposed to create a mystery so people want to continue to watch to see what you're talking about. They want to learn. So stick with me. I promise I'll tell you my theory. All right. But we're going to talk a bit about the knife for a bit, because it is important that you can get a look at them. One of the things you'll notice about Ruanas is they have a special look. They have a look all to themselves. They're different. You know, everybody else uses kind of crisp lines and so forth. And what Ruanas have always looked like to me is the knife a guy would have in Montana. It's a knife a guy would take to Montana. Remember, Montana was the world that, the world of Elmer Keith. And it was different. It was more about usable tools and the pretty and elegance, while Randall's and so forth are very functional knives. Loveless, again, very functional knives. But there's a special appearance to them. They appear to be more crisp and just visually right, more precise to it. And one of the interesting things to me about knives is how every one of them has a personality. Every individual knife does. That's the difference between handmade knives and factory-made stuff. Factory-made knives that you get from Camillus or you get from Buck, they're factory manufactured, and their goal is to make the knives the same every time. You pull a Buck knife off the shelf and open it up, it looks exactly like the others. And from the people who buy those knives, if there's a slight variance from what they've seen before, that's a defect and that's a flaw. And if you want your knife to be unique, what you do is you get it with a special handle material or a different sheath or a small customization, but otherwise they're all the same. With the quality handmade, handcrafted stuff, it's a different story. And the little imperfections about them, the slight variances between them, is, to me, where most of the beauty comes in. Now, I know knife makers that, their handmade stuff is just gorgeous. It used to drive me crazy when I was making knives, that they could get such precision and grinds and so forth. But the best of the best of the best, if you ask the guy who made it, he'll show you 3 or 4 things that are just a little bit different. I got this angle slightly different. This line is a little bit different, or these grooves are slightly, or the shape of the handle, or the finish. And they see the flaws because they're much more intimate with it. The usual guy who buys one as a collector doesn't see that way, but he does recognize that, wow, this knife looks like it's handmade. And one of the things Ruana's, the most obvious part of it is the handle itself. It's not that artistic handle so much as this is the handle you would want to wrap your hand around and grab and work with, because it fits and it's comfortable. We've got that thumb ramp on there to help when you're using it as a skinner. That thumb ramp, and it fits well and it's right. And there's a very precise touch, a very precise goal to when you've got it just right. These handles are rounded and they are curved and they do fit in your hand. But there's a very fine line between having it fit in your hand and be comfortable, and what I often refer to as a squeezed turd, where the guy tried to make the knife fit in his hand perfectly, and it looks literally like he took a turd and squeezed it, and the shape of his hand, that's the shape of the knife. The flaw with that concept is that you can only hold the knife one way for it to be comfortable, whereas with a well-shaped user handle, this knife is just as comfortable with the edge up. It's just as comfortable when you choke up to do close work. It's just as comfortable. The handle is there and it fits well. And that's something I think that Ruana Knives has really perfected through the years. Shape of the blades are obviously the shape of the blades. These are all hand-forged blades. And another one of the things I learned over the years, and from talking to knife makers and talking to guys who forge blades, they don't start out with a bare ingot of steel and shape the blade totally like you see on that TV show, the game show. That's not what they're talking about when they're talking about hand forged. They actually water jet out the blade to get the initial outside shape of the blade. Okay, and that's what they work on, and that's water jetted out, roughly. But it's very precise as far as the outside goes. But then blending the high technology and precision with the hand craftsmanship, the bevels are forged in. Okay, that's where they heat the steel and just beat on it and beat it into submission to be the shape that they want it to be. And you will see slight variations. If you would actually sit down and break out a caliper, you would see that, wow, this bevel's a little bit, it's a millimeter taller than it is on the other. That's where the personality comes from, and to me, where the fascination in knives comes from. There's a big difference between variation because of the limit, and it's handmade, and sloppy work. And that's a fine line that you have to walk to be good and to be successful in the industry. Anyway, once Ruana has forged the blade to shape, it's heat treated. Okay, and you have a completely heat treated blade. They may do the final sharpening on it when it's hard to actually get its edge, but at this point it's heat treated and it's shaped and it's ready to go. And then you have to go to me, the trademark of Ruana, which is the handle. Okay, the handles are cast aluminum. These bolsters that you see here, the bolster that you see here, and the pommel end, the back end of the knife, that's aluminum. It's also carried through on top to be a complete, like a full tang. That's also carried across there. And I was always curious how they did it. And again, doing some research and studying, I actually found a very fascinating part of this. What they do is, once that blade is shaped and formed and ready to be a knife blade, they actually clamp the blade without its handle, just the blade blank, put that into a mold, submerge the knife in water. They submerge the blade while it's standing up straight, and then they pour molten aluminum into the mold. So it forms all the way around the knife blade and the tang of the knife that's in there. Once that happens, the aluminum starts to cool, the blocks from the mold start to cool, but also the heat from the aluminum is getting sucked into the steel blade there as well, and that is where the aluminum welds itself permanently to the knife tang. It seems like it's totally unique. Pete Gerber did that on the early Gerber knives. When you see the aluminum handles, that was very much the same way they did it. I don't know who did it before. Rudy did, but somebody did. I'm sure there's nothing new in the world. Then you get the elk handles attached to it. Now, these are elk with Ruanas. If it's bone, it's elk. There actually have been, in the last few years, using wood materials as well, exotic woods like cocobolo and so forth, on these inserts. But elk, because elk antler is a very common thing in Montana, because the knives are still made in Bonner. The shop that Rudy worked in is the same shop what they're being worked in now. In fact, the milling machines that they use in that shop are milling machines that Rudy Ruana himself designed and built with his own hands to be the milling machines. They're still there. They use the same old coal forge that they did until, I believe, in the 1980s or 1990s, when finally they switched over to using a gas forge. So there's a lot of its old roots there. But when they make the knife, once they've poured the aluminum around the thing and they have the handle, obviously it's not finished, and we have to put the inserts in for the elk antler. And what always attracted me to them is that actually, and we'll put a close-up up here, is they actually machine in a flat for where the antler is going to sit, and dovetail either side. This is something that came in later. The very early Ruana knives, they were not dovetailed, but they dovetail it in. They take the stag, pretty much set up to where the thickness is going to be, and the matching dovetail is machined onto that. Obviously some adhesive, and the scales are then pressed into the dovetailed section. They then drill the holes all the way through to mount it, and another place where you get to see that handwork, somebody doing it by hand. Those pins are peened in by hand, and if you look closely at especially the bone ones, you'll see the peening marks from the pin. Just cool. To me, that's neat. That was somebody's hands who did that. The knife maker did it. And Ruana being a small company, that means that it was a Ruana knife maker that did that. That's what makes these knives famous. I think to me, they're fabulous. Let me wrap this up. We're going to change cameras here. Okay. I promised you I was going to clear up that mystery. I don't know if I necessarily have it cleared up. I have a theory that's going to clear it up. Remember, in anything you read about Ruana knives, you run across this sentence that makes me nuts. They talk about the 28 CD, that's this knife. And they say, favorite of famous Alaskan hunting guide. And it drops off. Remember we talked about that. And me being a 9-year-old super curious kid and hating mysteries, because I do. I've got to clear up a mystery. Somebody gives me a mystery novel to read. Somebody gives me a mystery novel to read. First thing I do is read the last chapter. Like, well, how can you do that? You're ruining the book. It's like, no, not for me, because I don't like mysteries. I want to know what happened, and I get my joy out of reading the book to see how the author put the story together. How did they formulate this? How did they make all these pieces fit? And to me, that's where my enjoyment is. So solving mysteries is important to me. I don't believe I've solved it for certain, but I have a pretty strong theory with it. I walked around with my Sherlock Holmes hat on for quite a while. Anyway, you look at knives and you see knives, especially when you're really into them. You see knives and you start to recognize a familial, I think that's a word, familial, I think that's the word. Like in the family, a relationship between them, how brothers, you can tell, oh, that must be your brother, or he must be related to you. Same thing with knives. And in some research about a Randall knife also that I got with the collection, I need to talk about that too, I forgot. I'll get back to the AD kid is showing his ADD. This knife, like the Randall I'm mentioning, I got a collection with a handful of Randalls. All these knives are mine. Okay, they're in my collection. And like a drunk owning a liquor store, that's a dangerous thing, because eventually you discover that you can't own every knife. You just can't. And if you did, it would suck, because you could never trade one off, because as soon as you trade one off, you don't have every one anymore. It's like giving somebody $1 million, taking all the money they have from them and giving them $1 million they have. That's their total. That's punishment, because you can never spend a nickel. It's as bad as being broke, because as soon as you spend a nickel, you've got $999.95. It's not $1 million anymore. So anyway, I figured out that, I gotta sell off knives too. Enjoy them, get them in my hand. There's been a lot of knives that have gone through my hands. Some I regret getting rid of, and at the same time, I don't regret getting rid of them, because they're in somebody else's hands, and they're going to enjoy them as much as I enjoy them. So I sell them. So any knife you see on the ad, any knife you see on a video, it's for sale. Contact me. We're starting a Facebook page. You can contact me there. You can put it in the comments here, as well as put comments in there saying, Reed, your commercials are too damn long, or Reed, you got this wrong. Put in a comment, contact me. It's the Mantuary in Escanaba, Michigan. you can give me a call. Say, hey, Reed, I really like that Ruana 28C. I want to buy it. How much? We'll dicker over it. We'll come up with an agreeable price, and the knife's yours. So these are for sale. Because I got to bring in money too, so I can buy more knives so we can talk about more. There's a handful that I've kind of gotten in my head that are unusual, and I think it'd be kind of cool. Anyway, so I'm looking at Randall-made knives, and I come across this Model 20, and it's called a Ward Gay. And in their advertising of it, which is kind of their description, they say, inspired by the design, or designed by famous Alaskan guide and bush pilot Ward Gay. Now, if you look into Ward Gay's background, he was active in the Alaskan Guide and met Bo Randall. Remember, he started his business in 1938. So it would make sense for him to be a contemporary of Rudy and Bo Randall. And if you look at this Model 28, it's not a copy, because nobody copies each other's knives, but you look at other knives and you draw inspiration from them. You see something about it that you like and you copy it. And a word of advice to aspiring knife makers: forget about doing stuff unique at first. Learn to build the classics and then put your own twist on the classics. And that's how you become a successful custom knife maker. Otherwise, you just end up with something weird that maybe you like, and maybe people buy them for me to be polite, but that's how you become the big time. Anyway, so I'm looking at this, and I look at this model, the Model 28C, and look at the Randall Model 20, and there's a familial, I'm almost sure that's a word, a family resemblance to the 28C in the Ward Gay. And the description of who he is kind of fits to me. It says, I could see Ward Gay having this 28C in his hand, really enjoying the way it feels, and running into Bo Randall, and Bo Randall's becoming a famous knife maker, or is a famous knife maker as well, running into Bo Randall, talking to Bo Randall, having Bo Randall say, well, maybe we ought to do a knife for you. And he gives Ward Gay gives his opinions and his thoughts on what a good knife is, and this is what he comes up with. And if you put the two knives side by side, I don't have the Ward Gay here. I didn't bring it because I'm so well prepared. I don't have the Ward Gay here, but if you look at it, there's something about them. That knife is more of a skinner, and remember, this is a hunter skinner. And the hunter skinner from an Alaskan Guide would be dealing with big critters. He'd be dealing with elk, and he'd be dealing with moose, and he'd be dealing with grizzly bear. Big animals where you need a big, heavy blade. And the Randall, there's no point in him duplicating that. Instead, what he does is uses some of those concepts and let's make a knife that's a little bit lighter, a little bit less heavy duty, and more handy and more light and easier to carry. So there's a resemblance there. There's a similarity. The sweep of the blade, the actual sweep and angle of the blade is there. The angle of attack between the handle and the edge of the blade. You can just see, or I just see that, boy, there's enough flavor there that it's real possible that Ward Gay was the famous Alaskan hunting guide that's referred to. Waiting for an answer from Ruana. I did contact them and ask. I'm sure they will. As soon as they give it to me, I'm going to post it. I'll do a video. By the way, it's the perfect time for me to hawk you with that. If you want to know when you're enjoying what you're seeing, subscribe. When you subscribe, hit that little like bell over there. Click on it so when I do post another video, you'll know it's posted. You can quick jump in and check. Oh yeah, Reed cleared up the Ward Gay thing. Hit that. Certainly put some likes up. Comments are really important for YouTube's analytics. We want this community to work. I want this to happen. I think it's an area that is underserved. And I mean, there's a lot of other knife sites out there. A lot of them are really good. I'd probably tell the stories that nobody else does and hopefully bring you a little bit of a laugh as well. Anyway, so back to Randall history. Back to Ruana history. Rudy had the company going, became full-time. Okay, became a full-time knife maker in 1952. Just everything else ended, and he was just making knives. In 1964, Rudy's son-in-law, Vic Hangus, was working at the phone company. And he had an artistic bent, and he believed that he had an artistic bent and a desire to do things artistic. So in 1964, Vic quit the phone company and went to work full-time with his father-in-law. And obviously Rudy taught him how to make knives, and they worked together and obviously made knives. They did quite well. In 1976, Vic's son, that would be Rudy's grandson, Vic's son, that would be his grandson as grandfather. In 1976, he joined the company. And in 1983, Rudy retired. So now the Hangus family bought the business or took over the business, and it still remained Ruana Knife Works, but Rudy was retired. So being retired from the knife business, having built the business up, I'm sure that Rudy was probably the old pain in the ass that would come in and give his grandson and his son-in-law a hard time about not, that's not how you're supposed to do it, and they'd kind of root for, I hope the old man goes fishing or something. Get the hell out of here and leave us alone. Anyway, in 1986, 80-year-old Rudy Ruana passed on, and the company still carries on, and they're still very, very big in Bonner, Montana. In fact, so big, when you go by, if you happen to be driving through Bonner, because everybody does, it's such a convenient location. But if you're in Bonner, Montana, I guess if you're visiting Yellowstone National Park, you can visit there. You will find the shop. It's the very same shop as Rudy Ruana started making knives, started Ruana Knife Works in. The coal forge is there. They don't use the coal forge as much anymore. I understand that Mark Hangus built a gas forge instead of using the old coal forge. But the forge is there, the milling machine that Rudy Ruana designed himself, they're still using that. They're still using a lot of the same tools. So there's a lot of the history still in that knife. Some of the little character of the knife contains a bit of Rudy Ruana DNA in it. If you watch, I mentioned Yellowstone National Park, if you watch the TV series Yellowstone, that's got Kevin Costner in it, my brother turned me on to it and says, you got to watch it. I turned on to a scene because I found out about it and looked. Kevin Costner is the lead, and his daughter, Beth, is a character in it. And there's a scene in there where they feature Beth's knife. It's like a big kitchen knife. It's really kind of a cool scene, and it's got some funny twists to it. But Beth's knife is there. And it's obviously Ruana. If you look at it, you can tell it's Ruana. That knife was made specially for the series, as a lot of the outdoor shots are from that area. And as I understand, the Ruana shop is in a couple of the shots, like the background shots there. So they're really very interesting. You can buy Beth's knife. I guess they do make it. You can order one. I think they're about $1,000. They're pretty cool looking knives. It's a big kitchen knife, the ultimate kitchen knife. And I'm certain it could carve an elk roast real well. They're neat, but those are for sale. Ruana does make regular production stuff as well as custom orders. From what I understand, they've kind of cut back a little bit on the regular production stuff to clear the books a little bit. The books, for those of you who aren't really into custom knives, custom makers, and somebody sees a custom knife made by the maker and says, you can make one for me. And obviously the maker's not sitting there twiddling his thumbs waiting. You know, he says, yeah, I can fit you in. I'll put you in the books, and when your turn comes, you know, we'll get you set up with a knife. Ruana's books were very full. He had people that have been waiting several years for knives, and they've decided to focus on getting that backlog down and get into it, although they say that they are making some regular production stuff as well. I'm thinking kind of hard about ordering myself Beth's blade just because it's kind of cool. I've got an older one here. I think I've yacked enough about these. Okay. They do make a neat sheath that comes with them. Maybe that is something I should have probably mentioned. These are working knives. They were designed to be working knives. They're intended to be working knives. They're still made to be working knives. And that's most evidenced by the sheath. I mean, being a sheath maker, I can look at it and go, that's a sheath made to be worked. You know, it's not sexy, but it's there, and it's absolutely workmanship. You know, it's actually a working knife. They're made with 10-ounce leather. It's an oiled tanned leather. They've got a big heavy loop that's attached, like it's expected that you're going to carry the knife. The way the knife fits in there, it slides in very deep into the knife, because that's really what a hunter in Alaska or Montana, or, you know, busting through heavy brush areas, it's not a matter of how quick you can get to your knife. It's a matter of the knife being there when you get there to use it. Okay, and they got a flap on them. Sometimes when you're looking at used Ruanas, they talk about the original sheath with sticker. When they're talking about with sticker, they're talking about this sticker right here, which says handmade in Montana. And that's the sticker they're referring to. They're a great knife. They really are very cool. Now that's all of it. I appreciate your stopping by and looking in. Again, subscribe, like, comment. If you have a Ruana, put it in the comments. Tell me which one you got. If you think I got something wrong, put it in the comments and tell me, hey, Reed, you got this wrong. If you don't like the shirt, lose that shirt and put a Hawaiian shirt on. I mean, I'd do it, but comments matter, likes matter, subscriptions matter in the analytics. Like I said, we want this to get big. Read About Knives as a family. When you come in and visit, when you come in to watch, you're part of the family. You've always got people that share a common interest with you. And that's important, and it's something that seems to be missing from this world. And we need to do more. We need to take care of one another. So thanks for joining us. Remember, if you need a friend, I'm here. Thanks for joining. I'm out.